Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys a guide on some really niche but very powerful gearing tips for Diablo. And I suspect that a lot of these tips will be relevant as the game changes, progresses through the seasons, and all the rest. Because they're in many ways kind of core game mechanics. And, those might change, but they have a lot of other changes to take care of first. So, a few tips. First one, keep mindful that low tier aspects, so the legendary powers that you might find on items, you take those and you plant them on rares or your existing legendary items. The ones that show up on lower level and lower grade legendaries are actually cheaper to extract and put on the gear that you actually want. So, what do I mean by that? Let's say you want +2 melee skeletons and you're playing a necromancer. And you have like 10 of these. So which ones do you use? Well, you actually want to be using the ones that show up on normal legendaries, because you can take that aspect, even though you couldn't, at some parts in the games, my understanding. Now you can just take those and put them on your high level ancestral legendary. So you want the normal ones, not the ones that show up on Sacred, not the ones that show up on Ancestral. This is quite powerful for aspects that are very common or you just have a lot of. And that is pretty mindful because in some cases this can be like 400,000 plus gold difference. It is actually a major difference. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, the aspects pulled from the top end legendaries, like an Ancestral legendary, yeah, it's like 500,000 gold almost. I don't know, it works that way, but it does. So keep that in mind. Save a little bit. There is another tip with aspects that is a pretty interesting one. So some aspects are flat. They're the same if you find it on a level 10 item or if you find it on a level 100 item. Again, like +2 melee skeletons. It doesn't matter what the level or the item power is that relates to that stat. It's just always going to be that. But some abilities, some aspects do have a range, and that range scales with item power. For example, there's one, it's Necromancer once again. You can get one where it makes your cold mages cast Blizzard every 10 seconds, and that Blizzard does a certain amount of damage. Okay? And if you get this legendary power from like a level 10 item, it's going to be like 100 damage. And if you get it on a, item power, 800, it's going to be like 2,500 damage. And that's pretty good, right? Yes, it is pretty good. You want to be mindful of their level. But you can do another thing here. This aspect, before you pull it from this item, if you go to the blacksmith and upgrade it, you are actually going to increase the values on the item. And when you pull that aspect, it's going to be from a higher item power legendary, so it's actually going to increase the range. So for example, if you find like an item 800 Blizzard on an item you don't really want and you want to put it on an item that you have, you should blacksmith upgrade, depends on how many resources you have, but at least 4, maybe even 5 times to get that range higher, to get that value higher, then pull the aspect and then plant it on your item. That can actually make a pretty big difference sometimes. There are a lot of powerful item levels when it comes to items. This is a pretty generic tip, but you should always be mindful when you're leveling of hitting certain breakpoints. And the 2 biggest breakpoints for endgame, 725. If you have an item that's basically over 700 and you can upgrade over 725, it's just going to get, higher stats. You're just going to have the highest stat brackets, except for like thorns and hit points, I believe are the 2. Maybe there's no, but I think it's just those 2. And if the other breakpoint below that is 625, it doesn't really matter. That's going to be mostly for like level 50, 60-ish characters that are trying to get in the World Tier 4 difficulty. But there is something to note that Sacred and Ancestral, it doesn't actually mean anything. Okay? They're just kind of like, yeah, these items generally kind of drop with this level, and these items generally kind of drop with this level. But some items don't have a particularly powerful baseline. Like a ring that's item level 800 versus a ring that's item level like 700, it's going to have like a 2 resistance difference sometimes. That's actually nothing, okay? So if you really want like to min-max your gear, you actually want to be picking up not just ancestral items in World Tier 4, but sacred items as well, especially for like rings and amulets, where their baseline stat, if it's not armor based, because armor's OP, it's kind of worth it. And oh, Necromancer shields, once again. Like, who cares about thorns? Really, who cares about thorns? So you want to get those stats, because if you get a sacred item with item level 700, you can up it to 725, and it doesn't matter that it's sacred. Sacred is not actually worse than ancestral. Sacred means that it just probably has a lower item level. But I've seen like an item level like 740 on a sacred item. Now, you can get really high item power from sacred. It's very rare. It doesn't happen very often. But you guys know how you play the game at high level. If you find items you don't want and they don't turn out like the ones that you were looking for, you just vendor them. And they still vendor for roughly the same amount. So you can get a lot of extra jewelry drops in your game if you just start picking up some of the sacred variants of it. And you probably should be doing that. Another one, and this is a pretty big one. I did feature this in the Necromancer build guide, if you guys want to check that out on the Diablo 4 playlist. My Necromancer uses an Offhand that is a drop from a rare mob. And there are a number of rare mobs in the game, just to give you guys a little bit of a guide here. So I'll link you guys this site. I couldn't really find a site that has them like very, very well done. But yeah, basically, there's a lot of different mobs in the game. They spawn pretty quickly when killed, and they always drop the same type of item, and that item almost always, by the way, has 3 stats and always has set stats. There's no like random stats on them. And the one that I kill for the Offhand for my Necromancer build is Princess Kin. And she drops an Offhand. This Offhand, it's kind of based on your level, because your level scales their level. But if you're like a level 95 or higher, I'm told that you can get an item level 840 plus Offhand. So it's it's literally the highest item power items you can find in the entire game, and they can be on weapons, which is really big. And it always drops with Lucky Hit, CDR, and it doesn't have CDR. I forget what it does. It has some really bad mod, crowd control duration, and Lucky Hit. Even though it's only 3 stats, the Lucky Hit is doubled, so it's actually better than a normal 4-statted item. But there's another thing. When it comes to items that you get, I believe, only through the campaign, so if you do the campaign, again, you'll see this, you get like an item that sells for like 2 gold. It's like, why does it sell for 2 gold? I don't know why. But the rare monsters, their drops also sell for 2 gold. So if you farm Princess Kin and you get like 20 of these like Offhands, it's kind of worthless because each one sells for 2 gold instead of like 20,000 gold. So that kind of sucks on that end. But it's a pretty big but. When it comes to enchanting gear, which is changing a stat into a different stat, well, the cost in materials is the same. You're still going to need the Forgotten Soul. Okay, so you got to hell tide it up. You're still going to need some of the other crafting materials. But the actual gold cost to reroll a stat is actually based on the vendor value of the item. So if you have an item that vendors like 30,000 gold, it's what you expect. The first reroll is like 60,000, and then like 200, 300, 400, and then it gets quickly to the millions. Okay. These rare mobs, because the item sells for 2 gold, the gold cost to reroll a stat is literally nothing. It's like 30 after you reroll like 10 times. It's nothing. So if you have a lot of Helltide currency, you can endlessly reroll these. So the rare mobs in the game are deceptively powerful. On one hand, even though they look like they only have 3 stats, often they have better than 3 stats because they have a stacked stat beyond a normal value range. But also, you can guarantee a perfect roll of your choosing eventually. It's not like finding a different type of item. Like if you find a normal rare, like a normal Offhand rare, after you re-roll it like 20 times, the cost to re-roll it again, it's like 5 million. That item is done. Okay, you cannot pay that and keep re-rolling it. But these items, you can just keep going until you get that stat. And in my case, for the Princess Kin Offhand, I wanted cooldown reduction, but it's not like, hey, maybe I'll get cooldown reduction. No. you're always going to get cooldown reduction. And you're always going to get perfect cooldown reduction if you have enough Forgotten Souls, because the gold cost of rerolling never really ramps up to any point where it's significant. And that is kind of built into these rare mobs and the items that drop. And there's a lot of rare mobs in the game. They drop weapons, a lot of other stuff. I don't know all the different items, but I know for Necromancer, you're generally just looking for that offhand. But there's a lot of builds out there, and there's going to be more builds in the future. So it's pretty important to know this stuff. Another one when it comes to affixes is the class affixes. And this is one that I talked about once again in the Necromancer build guide, which again is on Mobalytics. I will link this site for you guys as well. This is an awesome infographic. And you saw me in the Necromancer build guide talk about lucky hit chance if you have a barrier on the helmet. So you can never get that on a Necromancer. You have to take the item that you find on Necromancer, make a level 1 Sork or whatever, do a dungeon that has an aspect reward to unlock the Occultist, then take the helmet of your choosing and reroll it on a Sork, so then you can get the lucky hit chance while you have a barrier, then put the item back on your Necromancer. Almost all of these stats, unless it gives it to like a specific resource to a class or a specific skill that is based on a class, it doesn't actually restrict it to that class. So this does not make it a Sork item. It makes it, in fact, a best-in-slot stat for a Necromancer. And I have to imagine Necromancer is not the only class looking for a lucky hit. Okay, so there's a lot of other builds. Now, there are a lot of details in this, but I just wanted to go a few about some of the ones that I use. So the lucky hit while barrier is a really big one. Sork on helmet, you're probably going to be very mindful of that. Another thing that I like is if I'm looking for a stat that's generic, I like to go for a class that doesn't have many stats. Now, not all stats have the same weighting. Okay, if you've tried to roll a weapon that doesn't have int, you see int like every time on the rerolls. If you try to roll like a glove that doesn't have crit, or I think it's a ring that doesn't have crit, you're going to see crit like every time. Right? So I don't know how it works. It's a little weird and wonky. Some stats are vastly higher occurrence than others, but the category of stats are usually similar, right? So you have like some resource and then like skills. So like Druid versus Necromancer, Druid just has a larger pool of stats. So, let's say, for example, that you're playing a sorcerer, and the helmet that you want, well, you want life. Life is pretty good, right? We want life on our helmet. So, what do? Do we go on the Sork and start rerolling the helmet? No, you want to go on a Necromancer and reroll that helmet to get life, because Necromancer has the fewest class-specific affixes, and if the stat that you want on your helmet isn't among those that your class can offer, like let's say I don't want any of these, I just want life on my helmet, you actually want to do it on a Necromancer. Another really big one is Barbs. Barbs usually have the fewest stats. Like look at rings. Look at Necromancer rings and look at Barb rings. If you've played a Necromancer, you know that almost every single ring you find has some of these. Like every single one. There's so many. So yes, if you play a Necromancer, you almost certainly will want a Barb alt in order to roll for like maximum life or crit or whatever else on a ring. It's actually insanely important. Now, a few disclaimers. This does not always work. Okay, and this is how you know it won't work. So if you take your Necromancer ring and it has like one of these stats and you're re-rolling that stat, and you change it to a Barb stat because you're still looking for like life, for example. But then after a reroll or two, you see another Necromancer stat. This has happened just a very few amount of times for me. Yeah, for whatever reason, some items have kind of like a class drop built in. I'm not really sure how that works because usually they don't. One way that I know that it works is if an item has multiple stats of a class. So if you're playing like Necromancer and you get a Necromancer ring and it has like 2 stats that are Necromancer only, well, if you reroll one, the other is still going to flag the item as a Necromancer item. So if you're rerolling a double Necrostated ring on a Barb, you're actually increasing the affix pool. So you don't want to do that. There's another one here. So if an item only has one stat that's of your class type, but again, that is a stat that you want to reroll, you want to get that off the item right away. So for example, let's say we get a Necromancer ring with 3 other stats, and one of them is like, I don't know, maximum minion life, and you're not playing minions. So you want to go on your Barb, and you want to change that maximum minion life to, let's say, maximum life. Now the first thing you want to do when you roll the maximum minion life to something else is literally pick something else. Because the moment you pick something else is the moment it's no longer, again, usually, it's no longer a Necromancer item. And then it becomes a Barb item, because Barb is the one rolling it, and the Barb stat pool is much lower, and you'll probably then get like maximum life pretty quickly. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Now, there are probably a lot of other gearing tips, but these are some ones that I haven't really seen people talk about, but it really can be used to get your gear to the next level or get it more efficiently, which in an ARPG usually means you can try to get better gear more consistently, which also means more often. So, hope I've helped, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next.